What's up, everybody? Mark with Coffee and Toys here, and welcome to my inaugural video where we will be covering the entire Marvel run of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. This is going to be fantastic. I loved actually going back and reading the first issue of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and learning some history about it. And that's what this channel, with this series rather, it's going to be every Monday. So every Monday you can look forward to a video covering the original Marvel run of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. If you're not aware, that is issues 1 through issues 155, and I will sprinkle in some G.I. Joe special missions in there as well. I don't know if I'll do the yearbooks. I might. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in the yearbooks as well. But definitely issues 1 through 155 and special missions. So with that being said, I'm going to give you a little bit of history right now about why the G.I. Joe comic came to be. And I remember the history, but I had to do some research on it. And I do have my notes up in front of me, so if you see me kind of glance off the side, it's just because I'm reading my notes to make sure I tell you guys the information I have found if you're interested. So, with that being said, let's talk about G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue number 1. Okay, now that we're ready to go, let's talk about a little bit background history and why the G.I. Joe comic came to be. So, Hasbro decided in the early 80s they were going to bring back G.I. Joe. It had been dormant for a few years. It ended in the 70s with Action Joe or something like that. I can't remember the name of it. But they were going to bring back G.I. Joe. They were going to make it small. Actually, initially it was going to be a vehicle line with the figures as an accessory, but it wound up becoming a full action toy line. And however, there was a law on the books called the Action for Children's Television Act. It came to be in 1968 that basically said you cannot advertise during television shows for children. So because children are highly impressionable, you actually could not have a show that promoted or said you're going to sell toys. Or, you couldn't put your ads up for toys during television cartoon shows. So Hasbro had this idea. They were going to attack on all fronts, and they were going to start with a comic book. Because you couldn't put anything on television at the time, they were going to use a comic book. And the comic book was going to sell the action figures. And that is where G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero came to be. And they lockstepped it. When those first G.I. Joe figures came out, the G.I. Joe comic came out. I believe it came out in June of 1982. So, with that comic, that was going to be their ability to actually market to children because they couldn't do it with a television show. Now, full disclosure, the law, whatever you want to call it, was actually deregulated in 1981 by President Ronald Reagan. He appointed Mark Fowler for the head of the FCC, and they basically got rid of it. So that's actually what led to the G.I. Joe cartoon coming around. But the Marvel comic run of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero was the #1 selling comic for Marvel for many years. It was outdoing Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, you name it, G.I. Joe was #1. And we're going to jump into why G.I. Joe is #1 with talking about issue 1. So there's your history lesson on why we are here. Now let's talk about issue 1, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. All right, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue #1 is, of course, written by none other than Larry Hama, penciler Herb Trimpe, inker Bob McLeod, colorist Glennis Wine, letterer Jim Novak, and the editor was Tom DeFalco. So that is your team that brought G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero to publication. So very awesome. Who knew what that team was going to bring to the fabric of Americana? But that being said, let's jump into it. So we start the issue with a full page panel of the G.I. Joe team hoisting an American flag up. I mean, you don't get more American than that. And you see the G.I. Joe team while they're being, there's bombs going off, fantastic. And we get the background of the team. It says, opens with the introduction of G.I. Joe, America's elite counter-terrorist strike force. The most fearsome rapid deployment team of all stands ready to fight anywhere, anytime, any way. So very cool issue, or first, just big splash. here's your team, here's what's going on. And then we cut to the actual story, and we start with the first panel showing an Amtrak train, and that train is carrying Dr. Adele Burkhart, the nation's lead physicist, and she is behind the Doomsday Project. And while she's on this train, she is going to give an interview saying, "Hey, I did not know that this was actually going to be used as a weapon of mass destruction. And, I'm on my way to report to Congress to talk about everything." And the train is attacked by Cobra. Cobra is being led by the Baroness. So we see her break in. There's a firefight, and they actually capture Dr. Burkhart. And in a very cool and kind of crazy scene, they toss Dr. Burkhart from the train out the window, and she's connected to like a Fulton recovery system. Where they put you in a thing with like a hot air, or not a hot air balloon, but like a weather balloon almost. And they throw her out the window, and she gets chucked up into the air, and a Cobra helicopter secures her and takes her away. We cut back to the Pentagon now, and we see General Flagg talking to General Austin, and they're basically saying, what are we going to do? Should we let Dr. Burkhart die? Because half the nation thinks she's a traitor, and we don't want the information that's in her head being divulged to Cobra. And they basically say, no, that's not how we roll. We will send in G.I. Joe, is what General Flagg says. They are our top team. They will be able to pull her out from Cobra's clutches, and before that information can be taken away, be gained from her. They do cut, and we see a computer panel showcasing the OG-13, actually OG-14 Joes, because we do see a small one of Shooter, and there's a whole story around Shooter and how Shooter actually came into being here many, many years later. I mean, I think Shooter came out back in 2016, the female. But yeah, so we see the OG-13, and Colonel Abernathy is basically in charge of this, is what General Flagg says. Colonel Abernathy, who will become Hawk, obviously, he is being escorted to the Chaplain's Assistant School, which is actually a front for the G.I. Joe Command Center, the pit. And Clutch is actually bringing him to the pit. And, Hawk's like, "You need to slow down there, Clutch. We're not in any hurry." And, Clutch is like, "With respect to your rank, sir, I have been given orders directly from General Flagg that says I am to get you here as fast as possible." So they pull in, they secure the perimeter, and the vamp goes down underground to the G.I. Joe headquarters, the pit. And so they go down there, and Hawk, they're reviewing, he meets the team, and then they're now reviewing the strategy for getting Dr. Burkhart back. And they bring up a hologram that was taken by a Blackbird, which I thought was a really cool call out. Hologram, and it's Cobra Island. And he's like, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're gonna infiltrate the island as such. Grunt, Stalker, and Short Fuse, you will take out the airfield, the tower, and the hangar. Flash and Breaker are going to take care of the radar. Scarlet and Snake Eyes, your job is to destroy the on-prem generator that is keeping this island going. And then this will allow our secondary team of the remaining G.I. Joes to storm the fort once you guys have taken out everything that's just been discussed." So while they're doing that, Snake Eyes is hand signaling to Colonel Hawk, and Scarlet's translating it for him and says, "Wouldn't it just be easier to level the island with a B-52 and, oh well, if Dr. Burkhart dies, she dies." Doesn't, kind of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, if I can, quote Star Trek a little bit. Hawk then gives his famous speech, which was actually edited out of or partially edited for the original G.I. Joe run, but it's the thing that says, "We are soldiers, our job is to do the unthinkable and to be forgotten." And also that original "and be forgotten" was added on just recently with the reprint of issue number 1 from when Skybound Entertainment Image Comics took over the G.I. Joe license. They reprinted that issue with the correct original dialogue from Hawk. But that being said, we cut back to Cobra Island, the fortress on Cobra Island, and we meet Cobra Commander for the first time. He is speaking with Dr. Burkhart, and she's strapped down to this chair, and he's basically, doing Cobra Commander things, saying, "This is my plan, blah, blah, blah. We're going to use truth serum on you. We're going to get this out of you somewhere or another. All the stuff about Doomsday and any other secrets you might have." A Cobra radar tech tells Cobra Commander that there is a boat showing up on radar that is just big enough to have a landing party, and Cobra Commander's like, okay, send 2 platoons out there to dispatch it. We're going to stop this before it even starts, and we also need to make sure we carry out our contingency plan. More on that later. The Cobra platoons are about to engage the G.I. Joe team when they realize a missile is about to income on them, and it just blows everything to hell. And actually, we do get a cutback of the platoon actually returning to the base saying, wow, we didn't realize what happened. And, Baroness is saying, your team's a coward. They just tucked their tail and ran. And Cobra Commander's like, if they're sending G.I. Joe at us, I'm surprised anybody's even alive. So, but Cobra Commander's pretty smart. And he's like, I know this first attack's a feign. We have to prepare, get our forces ready, because they're wanting us to leave the fort, but we need to stay right where we are and prepare for a ground assault. In the meantime, we see Breaker and Flash are sneaking into the base, and they're actually, Flash is using his gun, his laser rifle, to cut the metal protective shielding around the cable that allows them to is going to allow Breaker to actually break into the radar and jam their frequencies. And it's fun. We get a nice little back and forth between Flash and Breaker, arguing with each other about how they're, how each is being way too clumsy. It was actually pretty fun to read that part. We cut back to the we cut back to the airstrip, and the G.I. Joe team members are destroying the airstrip, the hangar, and the larger size planes. Snake Eyes and Scarlet have infiltrated the fort, and they are sneaking around the Cobra operatives in the base. And we see Cobra Commander, and he is notified that Team 2, the heavy assault team, has now made landfall, and we see a big battle beginning. And we actually get a look at the Vamp, the Mobat, and the Ram motorcycle for the first time. So very cool. And again, these are all things that were available for toys in 1982. So again, that comic just showcasing everything, showcasing all the Joes you could buy on the toy shelves. And the Ram, the Vamp, they have the jetpacks, the jump, and it's really kind of cool. Masterclass by Hasbro. So Snake Eyes and Scarlet destroy the generator room. Cobra Commander's watching on the monitors, and he says, okay, it's time, Baroness, to fill you in on my plan I have. We need to execute right now. So we find that Cobra's contingency plan was to actually destroy the civilian village that's on the island. And their idea was that will slow the Joes down. They will stop. They will take care of the people that are there, that are still alive. And that'll give us time to make an exit with Dr. Burkhart. And the Joes actually straight up say, I think it's Stalker says, no, we are not stopping. This is exactly what Cobra wants us to do. We have to press forward. It sucks what's happened to this village, these innocents, but we have to take care of our mission first. And G.I. Joe, you will see, is always mission first. Like, don't get distracted. That's what they want us to do. Stalker grabs Dr. Burkhart. So I should say, they actually see Dr. Burkhart leaving the base in this Cobra vehicle. It's like an old 1950s car with a Cobra flag on it, and it's leaving Dr. Burkhart's in the back seat. Stalker swoops in with his jet backpack and scoops up Dr. Burkhart, and then she reveals that it's actually the Baroness in disguise. And meanwhile, Burkhart is actually being transported to a plane to get off the base. And luckily, Snake Eyes and Scarlet have met up with Dr. Burkhart and Cobra Commander, who we now see in his classic battle helmet. And he's got a gun to her head, and he's like, hey, you're not going to stop me. And any minute, when I push this button, more troops are going to arrive. And Dr. Burkhart says, no, it's a trap. And she actually tries to warn Snake Eyes and Scarlet that this trap is about to happen. And she jumps in front of Cobra Commander, who at the same time fires his pistol and injures Dr. Burkhart. So during this, whatever we want to call it, this kertuffle, whatever, Scarlet manages to grab a throwing star off her wrist and throw it at Cobra Commander, and actually hits him in the wrist. He drops his gun, and he lets go of Dr. Burkhart, who has been shot in the arm, but she seems to be okay. And Cobra Commander is then getting away. The secondary team of G.I. Joes, they break in alongside Scarlet and Snake Eyes, and just in time for the Cobra helicopter, just in time to find out that the building has actually been rigged to explode. The base is about ready to explode. Cobra Commander's gotten away. Baroness has gotten away. The Joe team's like, hey, we've secured the primary objective. We've got Dr. Burkhart. Let's take that Cobra helicopter and get the heck out of here. So they get on it. The helicopter gets away. The fort explodes. And the Joes and Dr. Burkhart are, they get away. And we get this funny little cut of Zap, Steeler, and Rock and Roll all upset because their respective vehicles have been destroyed. Talking about the Vamp, the Mobat, and the Mobat, and the Ram Cycle all get destroyed because that's what they were each, I believe, using during the. Or I'm sorry, it wasn't Zap, it was Clutch, Steeler, and Rock and Roll. Their respective vehicles get destroyed, and Hawk makes a comment. He's like, "Don't worry, General Austin, and we'll definitely make sure you get another new toy." And that was a kind of a fun little thing to hear. Meanwhile, the last page is a little Cessna flying away, and we see that it's Cobra Commander and the Baroness talking to one another, saying, our plans are foiled. Cobra Commander actually makes a statement saying, you'll have to take the stick because I can't fly it with my injured hand. And they get away. And that is where our issue ends. So that is issue one of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. That's the main story, and it was so much fun to read it. But that is not all we have in this issue. This was an oversized first issue when it first came out and any subsequent reprint. So let's jump forward and talk about some of the extras that are shown, including another story. So let's get into that secondary story showcased in issue 1 of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. Okay, now before we get into the second mini story from this issue, we do get a really cool diagram of the pit. Very cool how Marvel and Hasbro and Larry and just the G.I. Joe comic team were world building alongside Hasbro. And we get the pit, and we see that it has 5 levels. Remember, it's all underneath the Army Chaplain's Assistant Base, or whatever it's called. It's all underneath that. It's just a front. And it's really cool to see that and see all the different levels. And, when you get down to the 5th level, there's even a classified area, and we never really know what that is. And who knows? I can't remember if they talk about that more, what that classified area is in the future. But, hey, that's why we're covering the first 155 issues. But that being said, we do move forward into another story called Hot Potato. And Hot Potato is just a mini story tagged on to the end of issue 1. And it starts with Scarlet, Rock and Roll, and Snake Eyes. They're pinned down by a Middle Eastern terrorist group led by Colonel Sharif. And this group is being funded by Cobra. And it is G.I. Joe's mission to get this classified information that's on this tape. They have to get it to Stalker, Clutch, and Hawk, who are at a rendezvous point at a small little town nearby. But they are pinned down, being attacked. And while they're doing that, Scarlet gives Rock and Roll a tape and says, you've got to take this. The rendezvous is 10 miles away. If you've got a really light load and you run the entire way, you should be able to make it with no real issues. Snake Eyes and I will cover you. And she actually pulls out her gun and says, Snake Eyes is going to follow you. We're going to make sure of this. And Rock and Roll's trying to object, and even Snake Eyes points his gun at Rock and Roll. It's really crazy because they are mission first. So Rock and Roll leaves, Snake Eyes follows him, and Scarlet's left to her own devices. And she's already injured. I should make note of that. So she's pinned down, and meanwhile, Snake Eyes and Rock and Roll are going through the desert, and Rock and Roll's like, man, I thought you had something for Scarlet. I thought you cared for her. I'm really surprised that you're following me. But really, you should let me go back, Snake Eyes. You should take the tape, and I'll protect Scarlet, and you can get it to the rest of the Joe team. And he's talking, and it's funny because he Snake Eyes isn't going to say anything back to him, but he turns around and is like, Snake Eyes, and Snake Eyes is gone. Snake Eyes actually turns around to go help Scarlet, and Rock and Roll's like, oh, what the hell. So anyway, meanwhile we see Hawk, Stalker, and Clutch are still they're incognito, they're at this base, and they're eating, and then suddenly a rock goes flying through the building they're in, and they think it's a grenade. So they're all like, hit the deck. And it's actually this tape. And they're like, okay, there's the tape, but where's the rest of the team? And they hear Rock and Roll stealing their Ram motorcycle and going back to where he came from. And they're like, oh my gosh, where's the rest of the team? He must be going back. They must be in real big trouble. And Hawk's like, I think Stalker says we should go help them. And of course, once again, Hawk's like, no, mission first. We have to get the Hot Potato out of here. If if Rock and Roll's going back, it is our job to make sure that whatever happens to them, we can't go there either and risk losing this tape. They've already done too much. They've sacrificed too much, maybe even their lives, to get this tape to us. So we cut back. Snake Eyes shows up. Scarlet's super happy to see him. She calls him basically an idiot for doing it, but they're attacking, and we see that Rock and Roll's heading through the desert, trying to get to them. Colonel Sharif is sitting there. He's vamping for his troops, trying to muster their courage. He's like, okay, we're going to press on these guys, and we're going to end them right now because that's what we need to do. Scarlet and Snake Eyes, in the meantime, have ran out of ammo, and they're like, okay, I guess, this is it. And I don't remember if I wrote down the notes. I thought she had like one bullet left, and they were like, hey, we can just, take the I don't want to call it the easy way out because that's not how it should be viewed, but I can't remember if that's actually in this issue or not. I know they've used that in G.I. Joe before. But Snake Eyes and Scarlet run out of ammo, and just then Rock and Roll shows up, and he cuts down the enemy troops in the ram. Colonel Sharif sees it, and he calls in an airstrike, and right before the airstrike can take out Rock and Roll, the Vamp comes flying over a hill and shoots the airplane out of the air, and we see that Colonel Hawk is also on site. And they take out the Vamp. Everything's cool. Enemies have been dispatched. And everybody's like, well, where's Stalker? And we cut to the final part of the story showing Stalker on a commercial jet giving his order for a steak dinner on the flight. And he says, I would like to have a hot potato with my steak. So a very cool way. They actually sent Stalker away from the group to take the hot potato back to base. He gets away, and the G.I. Joe team survives and defeats Colonel Sharif. And yeah, that was a fun second issue. It was really fun, or second story. It was really fun to read that. Nice to see that Cobra wasn't always going to be the bad guy every issue. Now that is what it wound up being. Who knows if maybe that original issue was to say, hey, G.I. Joe will take on other people other than Cobra. But it was very nice to have that second story, kind of get more world building going on, knowing they did mention in this that of the team that was on site of Rock and Roll, Snake Eyes, and Scarlet, Scarlet is the senior member of that team. That's why she was able to call the shots. And yeah, just, building up that mythos that would become G.I. Joe so early on, so long ago. But that pretty much ends it for the review of G.I. Joe issue 1 of A Real American Hero from Marvel Comics. Drop a comment and let me know what you thought of this review. Did you read this story growing up? G.I. Joe issue 1 came out a few months before I was born, so I never owned the original issue until I was an adult. Much later in life, I actually do have a signed copy from Larry Hama of issue 1. It's in a protective glass. I probably should have pulled it out for the video, but I didn't, unfortunately. But that concludes our review of G.I. Joe issue 1. If you liked what you heard, please make sure you like the video. Hit the bell notification down below. Make sure to subscribe because every Monday I will be doing these reviews, and we will be going over issue 2 next Monday of A Real American Hero from the original Marvel run. But that being said, I'm Mark. You've been watching Coffee with Toys, and I'll see you later.